very, very soon. I think on Monday, I think, is when we switch over to Menachos. Okay, so we are up to the Gemara said that the Gemara quoted that in Shiloh, the Gemara says that there was one machana missing. Where does it say it over here? In Shiloh, instead of having the three machanos of Kuna Levia and Machana Yisrael, there were only two. So which one was missing? Was it the Machana Levia or was it the Machana Yisrael? Amar Rabba Mustavar the Machana Levia Havoi. It's Mustavar said that there was definitely a Machana Levia, and it must be that the Machana Yisrael that was not existent by Shiloh. If you're going to say that it was the Machna Levia that was non-existent, we're going to have a problem, because then Zovin Nimtzu Zovinu Tmei Mason Mishtachin Chutz L'Machana Achas. Azov has to be out of the Machna Levia, and the Tmei Mace have to be out of the Machna Levia. Well, they're both going to be then in the same machna, out of the machna levia. They'll be in the same zone. And the problem is, Vatayra Amra, V'liyitamu es machanehem, Lashon plural, and we learn, Tein machna lozeh, machna lozeh. The Zov and the Tamei Meis shouldn't be in the same zone. Rather, the Tamei Meis will be in a closer zone to the Beis HaMikdash than the Zov. And if there's no Machna Levia, you're not going to have it. So what are you going to say? There's no Machna Yisrael, then we'll be missing another zone. Nimtu Zovin u'mitzaroyin mishtachin l'mokom echad. Because if we have a Machna Levia and you don't have a Machna Yisrael, so what's going to happen? A Zov is going to be sent out of the Machna Levia, and the Mitzvah will be out of the Machna Levia. The problem is the Mitzvah has to be in a zone that's even further away than the Zov. Because Vatayr Amar Badad Yeshev, the Mitzvah must be by himself without any other Tmein, Shalo Yeshev Tamei Acher Imoy. Elaloilam Kula Klos Havai. You have to say that there was all three Machnas Lagabitum Atayra. So that means Chutz L'Machna Yisrael is where the Mitzvah sat. In the Machna Yisrael, a Zov and the Zava sat, and in the Machna Levia, even a Tamei Meis was able to be there, and the Tamei Meis was only prohibited from coming in to the Azar. So, what does it mean that by Gilgal there was only two, not three Machanois? We know that the Machna Levia was koilet in a Ritzeach, so Ritzeach that went there was in a safe house. That function of Machna Levia did not exist by Gilgal. I'm sorry, by Mishkan Shila. So Rashi ala kula hava udekatani lahayu ala shtei machnois linyan klitahu. In this dalka tyrus Machna Levia miliklet as a hargen shageg. For some reason, the Machna Levia did not serve that function during the years that the Mishkan was in Shiloh. Michlal, it's a mashma from here. The b'midbar have a kulta Machna Levia. That in the midbar, even though there aren't cities of Levim, it was just an area around the Mishkan where the Levim were. If there was a Ritzeach in the midbar, he'd be able to run in to the Machna Levia. So we're in. That's exactly the way it was. Well, Tanya, we learned. V'samti l'cha mokim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm going to make for you a place asher yonu shama where a Ritzeach can run. We darshan b'chayecha. The Shita Mekubeta sticks in b'chayecha l'cha mokim. It will be for you, meaning going on in the Shita Amokim Shalcha. You know where the mokim is going to be. That's going to protect Reitzchim, your place, Moshe Rabbeinu. Your machna, even in the midbar. We also learn So, even in the Midbar, there was an Ari Miklot, and that was in Moshe's vicinity, the Machne Levia. We also learn this Tamti L'chamakim means you, Moshe Rabbeinu, will be Zoicha to designate. That's referring to a different Ari Miklot. Mikan Amru ben Levi Shaharag Goyla mi Plach Leplach. What if a Ben Levi does Ritzicha? So how does he go into Golos? He's already in the Machne Levia. He can go from one country or one city to another city. Now that's, of course, referring to after we were in Eretz Yisrael and we had Ari Miklot, he would just have to go from one city of the Levi to the other city of the Levi. But Vimgola Lepolchai, but what if he went into his own city, but into a different neighborhood? Polchai Koltloi, his own city, the different neighborhood would also work to protect him. My crow, where do you see this in the Torah? The ear that was already being koiled him could be koiled him again. So it even means if he was a Ritzeach that was in our Miklat and he killed there, he can go to a different neighborhood in the same Ar Miklat, and that will save him, just like a Levi who lived there going to a different one. So that's the V'samti L'chamokim means two things. A is that Moshe Rabbeinu, his machne was the machne that would be koilet, and also V'samti L'chamokim, you will be zoichet to set up the Ar Miklat, and V'samti L'chamokim, you, even a Levi, will be able to benefit from the Ar Miklat. Bola Gilgal, they came to Gilgal. Tanu Rabban, Kol Nidav and Nidav Hayakarev B'Bam. If you could bring it b'neder u'v'nedava, which we that you'd be able to make a neder nedava like a chatas or an asham, ein kar b'Bama, you wouldn't be able to bring on a bama. What about a mincha? Could you bring a mincha on a bama or a naziris? Now, the naziris is a very interesting thing, because the karbanos that a nazir has to bring are mandatory. They're not a nedava, but the whole naziris is a nedava. So therefore, the mincha and naziris kareivim b'bama, those would be brought on the bama. Divrei Rav Meir, that is the shita of Rav Meir. The Chamarim no, loy karvu yachud el oilos u'shlomim bilvad. The Chachamim say it's only karbanos yachid that were nedavas like oilos and shlomim, not a mincha and not a karbanos of a nazir. Yehuda is the third shita who says as follows: Kol shatzibur v'ayachid makrivin ba'oil mayid. Anything that a tzibur and a yachid could be makrivin ba'oil mayid, which would include a chatos, an asham, any carbon that was able to be brought, whether it was by the tzibur or by a yachid, that was able to be brought in the Mishkan, Sheva Midbar, makrivin ba'oil mayid Sheva Gilgal, they would be able to be makriv in the oil mayid Sheva Gilgal. So Rashi tells us that Rabbi Yehuda is not directly commenting on what Rabbi Meir and the Chum said, but it's clear that he means to argue with them. So therefore, Zokt Rashi, it must be that they said something that he is disagreeing with. So let's have a look at Rashi. Kol hashatzibur ba'yochid makrivin ba'oil mayid shemidbar. I call carbon sulam nedarim nedavos v'chayvos. Every carbon you were allowed to bring in a mishkan. Makrivin ba'oil mayid shemigilgal. Therefore, you could also be makriv all those karbanos in the mishkan in Gilgal. The hi bama gedola, because that is a bama gedola. Now, the hashta palagad Rav Meir bad Rabbanan. Rabbi Yehuda's arguing on the Meir Rabbanan. In what way? The midikatani kol shatzibur lashminan dein chilek ba'oil mayid shebemidbar l'oil mayid shebegilgal. Whatever karbanos you were able to bring in the mishkan, you were able to bring in the mishkan in Gilgal. Michlal, it must be the shema'inu Rav Meir of Rabbanan darmer yeshchil. It must be that Rav Meir and the Rabbanan must hold that you weren't allowed to bring all the karbanos that you would bring in the Mishkan in Gilgal as well. So what did they hold? De'eld she'ein yochid makriv boy chayvos. The nafkamina here is that Reb Meir and the Rabbanan hold that a chatos and a asham you couldn't bring at all. You couldn't bring it on the Mamash Yachid that everybody agrees with, but you couldn't even bring it in Gilgal. You couldn't bring it in the Mishkan B'Midbar. Chatas and Asham, karbanos of Chayva were karbanos that the Yachid could bring in the Mishkan, but they weren't able to bring it in the Mishkan by Gilgal. The Taimayu Nami Shemini L'Kamon. We're going to understand the reason for this halacha. That Afilu Bama Gedoyla Loi Karvi LeYachid El Nedarim and Nedavos. They held that even in Gilgal, yes, even in Gilgal, they were only able to bring Nedarim and Nedavos and not Chatas and Osham. So for 14 years, if someone had to bring a Chatas or an Osham, he had to wait. And then when Gilgal opened, they were able to bring, there was probably a big backlog of karbanos that had to be brought. So that's what the Rebbe says. Kol shatibur vayachad makivin oil moed shebamidbar makivin oil moed shebagilgal. Ma bein oil moed shebamidbar levein oil moed shebagilgal. Then what was the difference? They have exactly the same features and the same eligibility. So what was the difference? Ella oil moed shebamidbar loy hayu bamos mutaris. In the midbar, no personal bamos were allowed. And oil moed shebagilgal hayu abamos mutaris. And on those bamos, the only thing you were allowed to bring were nedarim and nedavos. But there's also a machlokes as to whether or not you would be able to bring a mincha and a ziris. Right? That's the machlokes between Reb Meir and the Chachamim. What does Rabbi Yehuda hold in that respect? I'm not sure. Maybe that'll come out soon. So oil moed shebagilgal hayu abamos mutaris. Ubamasoi sheberosh kagoy. So now Rabbi Yehuda is sharing with us what is the halacha with the Bama Ketana. So this sounds very much like, in that respect, Rabbi Yehuda is agreeing with Rabbi Meir. I'm sorry, with the Chachamim, right? In that respect, Rabbi Yehuda agrees with the Chachamim that you could not bring on a Bama Ketana, you could not bring a mincha or karbanos of nazirs. Okay, the Chachamim. So he's going to be a fourth shita. It's not the same chachamim as the chachamim that we quoted a moment ago by Meir. The chachamim kol shatzibur makrivin ba'oil moed shebemidbar makrivin ba'oil moed shebegilgal, which sounds exactly like Rabbi Yehuda. The kan, but say on the bama gedoyla, say on the bama ketana. In Gilgal, loy karvu yachid ela oila ushlomin belvad. So this sounds exactly like this Chachamim here agrees to this Chachamim over there. So there seems to be no difference at all, la'alacha, between this Chachamim and this Chachamim, which the Gemara is going to ask. What is the difference between these two Chachamim? They both seem to agree that only an Oilan Shlomim could be brought on a Bama Ketana. Reb Shimon Omer, now we have another Shita. Av tzibur lo yikrivu ela psachim. Even the tzibur that brought karbanos in Gilgal, they couldn't bring any carbon tzibur. They only were allowed to bring a carbon pesach. And as Rashi says, what are we excluding? We're excluding anything that didn't have a kaviyas man. So a carbon pesach and the yamim tovim karbanos, that the karbanos that they brought on a specific day, those you were allowed to bring in Gilgal, but not like a par helam davar, which is a carbon tzibur, but it only is brought when there's that aver done. It's not, it doesn't the kaviyas man, it's not on a schedule. Or seir avodas kachavim lo karvu lahem begilgal. Only scheduled karbanos, such as the carbon pesach and chayvay shekavu alam zman. Carbon pesach tells us that it's considered a carbon of chayva. The carbon pesach was considered carbon tzibur because it's brought together with everybody. Okay, I believe Rashi speaks that out on the base. I just want to check on it to make sure I'm not missing it there. I'm pretty sure Rashi speaks that out on the base. That I'm sorry, it's Rashi on the Aleph. So let me draw your attention to the third intermediate line in Rashi. Pesach carbon simur korelei the also bechanufia. It's brought together. Everyone brings it together, even though each person brings his own individual, or each family brings his own individual. But since they're brought together, carbon Pesach is considered a carbon of tzibur. Okay. My time of the Rab Meir. What is the svar of Rab Meir who says that you could even bring menachos as well as naziros karbanos? The Amarkra, it says in the pasuk, loy sa'asun, when they came in Eretz Yisrael and they were about to set up the Mishkan in Gilgal, the Torah said, loy sa'asun kechal asher anachnu oisin pa'ayoin ish kol hayasher be'ena. Here, you're only allowed to bring karbanos of ish kol hayasher be'ena, meaning karbanos that are nida v'nida. Omelan Moshe Yisrael. When you come into Eretz Yisrael, Yisharis Takrivu, a carbon that we define as Kol Hayasher Be'enov, meaning it's a voluntary carbon, those are the only carbonos you're allowed to bring. Chayvos Lois Akrivu. You could not bring chayvos such as a chatos and a asham, but minchos unaziros Yisharis Ninu. I consider menachos you could give benedava, and naziris I hold that it's nadav as well, because no one forced you to become a nazir. The underlying his chayvus to bring these karbanos is the naziris that you voluntarily accepted. But the rabbanon noel that menachos and naziris you didn't bring on the Bama hold a mincha b'Bama. First of all, never was a carbon mincha brought on the Bama at all. And naziris chayvus ninu, I don't consider naziris voluntary. I consider it chayvus because the actual catalyst to bring the carbon is a chiyuv. Yes, you created the catalyst, but now that you're a nazir, it is a carbon of chayvus. Let's have a look at Rashi. Lois asun the achar biyas haaretz mishtoi. This was a pasuk that was presenting the story that happened right when they came in Eretz Yisrael. The kamer lois asun kishetavoyu begilgol kechol asher anachnu oistem pe'ayon. Don't do, when you're going to be in Gilgal, don't do what we do now, meaning sha'anu bein tzibur bein yachid makrivin chatois v'ashamayis. The regular mishkan, you brought all the karbanos, sai tzibur, sai yachid, sai v'nida v'nida, sai if there's a chiyuv. U'mchor meiser she'ein chayvos she'ein kavua lem zman. The kol shekain chayvos kavua lem zman is what you were able to bring in the mishkan. Avol ma anu oisin sham. But what could we do in Gilgal? Ish kol hayasher be'ena. Meaning, hayachid la yakiv sham. The yachid shouldn't be makib on the Bama, el nadarim v'nedavos sheyashru be'ena v'lindai v'lindai. That's why they're called yisharis. Ad mosai, until when will you be restricted that you won't be allowed to bring other karbanos? Ki levosam ela menucha v'lanachla, and we said menucha means shila. At the voile shila, you're not going to be able to bring those karbanos. Yisharis takrivu are nadarim and davos. Chavis leisa krivu, referring to Yechidim, will not be makriv a carbon chayva. Now that only is the individual could only bring the darim, but a rabbim could bring the darim v'davas. V'loy ploy kra ben gedoyla ben ketana. The Torah doesn't make a distinction between the Bama gedoyla, meaning the Mishkan in Gilgal, and the private Bama. The yachid like karav el nida v'nida. A yachid could bring an oila, a shlomim, sai on the Bama Ketana, sai in the Mishkan and Gilgal. But a yachid could not bring hilchach she'ein nida v'nida, ein karav b'Bama yachid. You can't bring it in a Bama yachid. The ein kachet tzibur craven, because you're not makbid, you're not makbid kachet tzibur, because it's not b'mistichin karbanis tzibur craven b'Mishkan karbanis yachid. Craven b'Bama. Okay. Now we said that the mayor held menachos u'naziros are yisharish ninu. They're voluntary karbanos. The alvagav the b'melois nizrei having karbanos of choyvalov mi al yedei neder bo'alav. The catalyst to be mechayiv the karbanos was done through a voluntary acceptance. The rabbanon held First of all, ein mincha b'bama, you never bring a mincha b'bama at all. Kedamin come on, like we're going to learn soon the reason, because it says vasisa is v'checha. It has a lashon zevach, and we'll see soon. V'loy minachos, a mincha was not considered a zevach. Here the chesiv l'mana sheyaviu b'nei Yisrael es tivcheim ashem zoivchim al pnei asada. What does that mean? That's how you bamos b'shas heter shalom. They're able to bring Zevachim on the Bama, but not a mincha. V'avim Hashem, oisham. What is V'avim Hashem? We learned it already at the beginning of the parak. Oisham shehuktashu b'shas heter. If you were makdish a korban before Bamas were outlawed, like during those 14 years of Gilgal, and you didn't have a chance to bring that korban until Gilgal were Bamas. I'm sorry, not until Gilgal, until Shiloh were Bamas were already outlawed. The pasuk zeh, we said earlier that this pasuk is referring to kachim shehuk tashu b'shas heter v'krivim b'shas isser. Remember, we said there's only an isser lav and a say, but there's no chi of kares for that because it says dafka this isser and not other isser. It doesn't include a chi of kares. V'zachu v'shashlam. Okay, so umafarish b'teres kahanim ein lishakarvim b'bama elo shlamim. They were only able to be makriv in a bama, a shlamim. Da ukimna bekache bama. Because we're talking about kache bama. Minayin af oila. How do you know that you're also allowed to bring oila? Tavadam is Zevachim, referring to a carbon oila as well. Yochal af chatas v'ashem. Tavadam oisam. This is what we learned already. Oisam is mamai, dafka these and others. Umar rois, to be mamayit, chatas, and the nosham, but to be marban oila. Achri sharibo miyat amrit mashlam haboy b'neder v'nedava afkol haba b'neder v'nedava. It will include a carbon oila, but it will not include the asham nechatas. Ulur Meir it's rabinami menachas u'naziris. According to Meir, it includes menachas and naziris as well. He holds we don't learn from zevach to exclude a mincha, and he holds naziris is considered voluntary. For abundant daikus v'acham v'menachas ela davar hazavuach. But that's not how Meir saw it. And the Chacham also the Nazir is chayvu. The hulayin is not of elu karbanis. Lemaisa he didn't give these karbanis b'nedava. Ella what he did was asher asma b'yaynu v'taglachas ume'elav nischayev b'karbanis. Okay, so now we understand what the machlekes of Meir and the Chacham is as to whether or not menachos and the karbanis of a Nazir would be brought on the Bama Ketana. Amar Shmuel machlekes b'chatas b'ashem. Now, a Nazir brought a korban chatos, he brought a korban asham, but he also brought an oila and he brought a shlamim. So, Zok Shmuel, where is there a machlokes about which korbanis is there a discussion as to whether or not a Nazir can bring on the Baba Katana? That's only the chatos and the asham part of his chayvus. But the oila and shlamim that the Nazir has to bring, divrei akol yisharis nenu. Ukravi. Even Meir agrees that you would be able to bring. That you would be able to bring. Frank the Gemara, Moisev Rabbah, Chazav V'shoik, we have a brisa that says, the Chazav V'shoik, Utrumas Lachmei Toida, and the part of the Toida, the parts of the bread that are taken off, and given to the kohen, hagin bebama gedola. You only do them by a bama gedola, ve'eno hagin bebama ketana, but it would not be relevant by a bama ketana. What are we referring to? Zot Rashi, chazav v'shoy, hamura mishlomim v'toida. The chazav v'shoy was taken after shlomim, was taken from the carbon toida, and it was given to the kohen. So that's what we're talking about here. The Bach changed the gear, so not directly relevant to what's going on over here. Utrumas lachmei toida is referring to the arba chalois hamurumois lekoyin me arba mina chalos shabatoida. By the carbon toida, they brought 40 chalos, 10 from each type. So one from each type was given to the kohen. Carbon. So what does it say over here again? You would give that to the kohen if the carbon was brought on the Bama Gedola, but the Eino Hagim B'Bama Ketana. If the Shlomim was brought on the Bama Ketana, you wouldn't give these matanas to the kohen. Now, there was another matana l'kohen that was given. You know what? The shlomim of the nazir, you would give the zroya b'sheila, you would cook the arm, and you would give it to the kohen. Now, why didn't it say as well that the carbon shlomim of the nazir, if in fact you do bring the carbon shlomim of a nazir on the Baba Katana, why didn't it say that the Matana L'Koyin doesn't happen there either? The Ilu Azrari B'Shela Sheyira. How come it didn't mention that? If you're going to say that there's a machlokes, could be even the oil of the shlomim of the nazir is not brought in the Bama Katana, Hamani Rabbanon. It'll go according to the Rabbanon. As we said, the Rabbanon hold that there is no carbon naziris by the Bama Katana. If you're going to tell me that the whole machlokes Rabbanon and Rabbanon is only about a chatas and oshav component of the nazir's carbon, but the oil and the shlomim of the nazir's carbon, everybody agrees that it's brought on the Baba Katana, well then, Hamani. Nobody holds like this. Everybody would agree that the oil and the shlomim are brought on the Baba Katana. If everybody holds that the oil and shlomim are brought on the Baba Katana, why didn't the Brisa say that the Zorei B'Shela of the shlomim of a nazir that was brought on the Baba Katana would not be given to the kohen? The fact that it doesn't say so, we must change what Shmuel said. We must say, Yitmar Haki Yitmar. Amar Shmuel Machlokes by the Shlomim. The Machlokes is by the Island Shlomim, where the Rabbanan say they did not bring that on the Bama, and the mayor held they did bring it on the Bama. Aval the Chadash v'Osham, the Chadash and Osham carbon of the Nazir, Divrei HaKoil Chayvis Ninu. Everybody agrees there's Chayvis v'Loi Karvi. So even though the Chadash and the Osham was only triggered by the fact that you voluntarily accepted upon yourself Naziris, we don't consider that a carbon of the Dava. That everybody agrees on carbon Chayva, and it wouldn't be brought on the Bama. The Machlekes is if the Oila and the Shlomim of the Nazir would be brought on the Bama. According to the Rabbanan, it would not, and therefore there was no need for the Brisa to mention anything about Azori B'Shela, because that's never going to happen. And according to Reb Meir, in fact, you are allowed to bring it on the Bama, and the Azori B'Shela of that carbon would not go to the Kohen, just like the Chaz of the Shaykh and the Lach Mitaida wouldn't go to a Kohen. Amar Mar, the Chachamim Oimrim, Kol Shatzibur Makrivin B'Oyel, Moyed Sheba Midbar, the Tzibur was able to bring in the oil Moyed Sheba Gilgal. Zok to Gemara, my Tamayu Durabanan. What is the svara of Durabanan? Zok to Gemara. And we dash it ish Yisharis who the likroiv chayvais loy likroiv. A yochid could only bring the darv and the davais, and it cannot bring chayvais. The tzibur afilu chayvais likroiv, but the tzibur could bring karbanas of chayva. Zok Rashi ish who the chayvais likrivu ba'afilu bigdoila. Only the individual wasn't able to bring chayvais in the Bama Gedola. Avol Tzibur Makrivin chayvais, the Tzibur could be Makriv chayvais. Who argued that? Reb Shimon argues. Reb Shimon said the Tzibur can't bring chayvais, the Tzibur could only bring chayvais hakavus lamzma. But the Chacham mold that no, a carbon Tzibur, that's a chayv, avada, you would be able to bring in the Mikdash Shabbat. Rabbi Yehuda Amarlach. Rabbi Yehuda says that Yochid Nami Makriv Chayvus P'Gedola. Oh, so I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. The Rabbanan Shita that we're looking for is the Shita who argued in Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said that a Yochid could be Makriv, a Chatos and an Asham in the Mishkan and Gilgal, and the Rabbanan held no, a Yochid can't be Makriv, a Chatos and Asham at all. During those 14 years, he would have to wait with his Chiyav Chatos until the Mishkan and Shiloh opened up. So he learns it from Ish Yoshua ben Avyasa, Ish Yisharis with the liquor of Chayvus la liquor. And Ish, a Yochid, could never bring Chayvus, Sai not of the Bama G'doila, Sai not of the Bama G'tana. But the Tzibur Afilu Chayvus liquor. And Rabbi Yehuda who held that a Yochid was able to bring his chayvais in the Mishkan Sheba Gilgal, he can bring his chapas and his asham amalach kiksiv hayashar. When it says hayashar, meaning when it's memayit a Yochid from a kravis chayvais a be'enov ksiv, it's only referring to the Bama. So we don't say that a Yochid is completely excluded from bringing karbanos of chayv. He's only excluded from bringing karbanos of chayv in his own personal bama. He ksiv ayashar, it's be'enav u'dechsev, it's only referring to the Bama Ketana. But on the Bama Gedola, even an individual during those 14 years was able to bring a carbon asham or a carbon chatas. Ella haksiv ish, but it does say ish. Why did it say ish kol ayashar be'enav? According to Rabbi Yehuda, it should have just said kol ayashar be'enav. You don't need the word ish at all. It's completely extra. So Ella Rabbi Yehuda, haksiv ish lav l'meimra. Isn't it to say that davka ish yisharis hu de likrev hachayvais loy likrev? So we should still make a deal. So Rashi the lav lemute af mi bama gedola asi. If the ish is not to tell you that you cannot even bring a chas to the Bama Gedola, if that's not what it's for, then what the pasuk could have said was nichtayv kol hayasher beinav. It didn't have to say ish kol hayasher beinav. It could have said kol hayasher beinav, and we would know it's speaking about the Bama Ketana. The chivin the beinav, you're touching beinav means on the Bama Ketana. The chiv of the beinav hainu Ketana pshita the issue the mimid the tzibur la mikriviba. If it just said Kol Yasher Beinav or not, it's telling us that you could only bring on the Durham and the Durham and the Davis on the Bama Ketana. We know it's talking about a Bama Ketana because it says Beinav. What is the Ish for? Ish must be to tell you that a Yochid cannot even bring a carbon Chayiv in the Bama Gedolah. So Shver and Yehuda. So no, that's not what Ish teaches you. Ish teaches you a different limud. Hiksevish lahachsher sazar. To tell you that the avoida done on the Bama doesn't have to be done by Kohen, doesn't have to be done by Bechor, it can be done by a regular Zor. I don't need Ish to tell us that. Zor, mi v'zorek HaKohen es Adam ala mizbeach Hashem nafka. Nafka on the mizbeach, in the oil moed. Do you need a Kohen? But everywhere else where you wouldn't. So no mao the tema liboy kadosh b'choros. You would think no, it doesn't need a Kohen, but maybe you need a Bechor to do the avodah on the Bama Ketana Kamei Kara, like before the Mishkan, when everything was done to the Bechor. Kamash Malam that you need that Kamash Malam that you don't need a Bechor, you don't need a Kohen. A regular person, any person can do that avodah in the Bama. Freit the Gemara Chachamim Hainu Taina Kama. This was the kash we had earlier. Both Chachamim seem to agree that you cannot bring menachos, or you could not bring menachos or the karbanos of Nazir on the Bama. What's the difference? Amar Papa, a third thing, karvu nesachem b'midbar ikbenai. Even though neither one b'chalal is even talking about nesachem, we'll say that one allows nesachem in the midbar and one not. Now we already had the whole discussion of whether or not they're makrib nesachem b'midbar. It's totally in the Torah introduced the parsha of nesachem with this kisavay al aretz, and the shaila was, do you say that they were already bringing the Sachim in the Midbar, and Kisavay Lars was to tell us that you're going to bring down the Sachim even on the Bama Ketana that's now starting to become mutter, or maybe they were never in the Sachim brought at all in the Midbar, and Kisavay is coming to tell you that when we have the Mishkan in Shiloh, then you're going to start bringing the Sachim. So who holds what? Zakt Rashi, Li Rabbanan Kamoi, according to the first Rabbanan, will say Loi Karvin the Sachim at Midbar. And it's only oilo shlomim greda beloy nesachim kagamri the karvi bebama. The bemidbar like karvi. They were never nesachim. They never poured wine on the mizbeach before this point. The Torah introduced it that will start in Shiloh, because he learns that chisavoy the parshas nesachim is latini nesachim by mishkan Shiloh also, which is la'acher Yerusha v'yeshiva, like we said earlier on Daf Kuf Yud. Rabban Basroi, they're coming to add. Litfuya Yosy. You could tell that they're coming to add additional things that are allowed. Why? Miditnan Mishni Yisera, because Lamaisa they had an extra utterance. They said Kol. They used the notion Kol Shatzibur Makribin Loyal Moyed Shabamidbar Makribin Begilgal. Lamahu lemisniha. Why do they have to say that? Rabbi Yehuda Nami b'tzibur kavaseyu kamar. The Rabbanan aren't really adding anything to Rabbi Yehuda Shita. All they would have needed to say was kan v'kan, sign the Bama Gedoyla, sign the Bama Tana, loy karvu liyochid, elo v'shlamim. They only brought a carbon yochid, and the carbon that they brought for yochid was dafka nida v'nida v'nida l'shlamim. The fact that they used a lot of words and they said kol shatzivim akrivin v'yomoid shevimidim akrivin b'gilgal, it must be telling us el l'tfuye adrabanan kamoyos. They must be trying to tell us that we're not just arguing on Rabbi Yehuda, we're also arguing on the original Rabbanon, and we're saying that they were also Nesachim. Whatever they had to be makriv in oil moed shebamidbar shar Nesachim, makrivin by moed shebegilgal, uletfuye Nesachim asu. All they're telling us is that Nesachim were also brought in the oil moed shebamidbar, and they would be able to bring them as well in the Bama Tana during the first 14 years. Remember the cover of Midbar Latzibar Ula Yachid, the Chain Bilgilgal, Bishte Abamis. Lamanda is like Karba B'Midbar, if you hold that they did bring the Sachem in the Midbar, is like the Karbu B'Bamas Yachid Bilgilgal. By definition, they'll learn that they also brought them on Bamas and Gilgal because that's what the Torah was talking about when it said Kisavoy. The Kisavoy was saying the same way you were bringing the Nesachim until now in the Mishkan. Now in your Bama Ketana, you should also continue to bring the Nesachim. The Torah is not telling you about the concept of the Nesachim. It's been going on already for the 40 years since the Mishkan was built. So if it's introducing now the Nesachim, it must be introducing it for the Bama Ketana. Okay, we'll stop here. And Be'ez on Shabbos, we will start